There's a new way to buy houses as of August 2024, and I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know as a buyer in the new world of real estate. Hi, I'm Taj Richardson, Home Oregon Coast, here on the Oregon Coast, buying and selling houses for our clients on a daily basis. In this video, what we're going to discuss is the new change in how a buyer works with a buyer's agent in the United States when it comes to our real estate services. This comes directly from a settlement between the National Association of Realtors, the NAR, and plaintiffs who had issues with the way commission was structured historically for real estate transactions. So with that, we're going to dive into this. We've got a few different bullet points on key parts of this that you need to be aware of as a buyer in the new real estate world. So with that, here is what the settlement means for home buyers going forward. The biggest difference by far is that as a real estate broker, I am now required to talk through a buyer representation agreement and determine the fee that I will charge as a real estate broker before I can even show a house to a buyer. And that is significantly different than the way that we're most accustomed to viewing homes as buyers in the real estate market, especially in a market like ours where we are a big second home, vacation home, or retire to market. We have people that oftentimes will call us and because they saw a yard sign while they're on vacation and say, I really want to see this house. Maybe we should move here. And that's how the conversation starts. Historically, we jump in the car after a 5-minute conversation and meet them, get them into the house, show them the house, and then after that, follow up based on what the buyer's needs are. Per law, now we can't do that. We have to have a full engaged conversation with our potential buyer clients about how we do services and how we get paid for those services. And that's the biggest difference by far. And it's going to be weird the first time a buyer is told by the buyer's agent who they called and asked, I'd like to see this house right now, for the agent to say, well, we need to have a conversation about how I get paid before we can do that. So get ready for that strange new world. There are different ways that an agent could potentially have you sign an agreement with them. There's exclusive agreements, there's non-exclusive agreements. There's even something called a touring agreement that basically says, hey, compensation is something we have to talk about, but we can do it down the road a day or two. If we both sign this agreement, we can go tour a home before we have that conversation. So it's going to depend on how the buyer agent does their business. That will determine what kind of an agreement that they may need for their business with a buyer before you go out and look at homes together. We're going to say most agents are going to go with an exclusive agency agreement. The primary reason for that is because that's the same kind of listing agreement we have with a seller when we're talking with them about selling their home. The change is going to really replicate what has historically been the standard for a listing agent working with a seller. Engagement happens, however that is, there's a conversation. Conversation is usually going to be followed up with a planned in-person or nowadays video meeting where they can really have a sit down, learn from each other where they are in both their journeys, the real estate professional journey, where the seller is in their journey to getting ready to sell their home, and try to come together on a good fit, talk commission, talk strategy, and really lay it all on the table. Then the seller is going to consider and say, what, I like this person, let's go ahead and sign on the dotted line. That process is generally what buyers are going to start to go through. So you'll reach out to a buyer's agent. Hey, I'm interested in seeing this home. I saw this home on a website. I saw your listing. It was your yard sign. I called you. I'm interested in learning more about this house. Well, that's wonderful. Tell me a little bit about where you've started, where you've gotten to so far. Have you talked to a lender yet? Simple questions. Well, this is all wonderful. What I'd like to do when I have a little more time is sit down and have a full engaging conversation so I can talk to you about how buyer representation agency works, and we can see if we're a really good fit to work together. What's good for you in the next couple of days? You set up that meeting, Zoom or in person, and then you really go through the buyer agency representation, what that means, as a buyer, what you're looking for, how long you've been looking, what's your timeline, what do you have to do to be ready to buy, and just try to really make that connection, see if the agent, you feel that trust building with the agent, and then move to the point of being able to sign on that dotted line. So that's kind of the new normal of buying a house, and that's going to be what you get with the agents who really know what they're doing. Signing that agreement is the first step. Now, that agreement has some important elements to it. It's got to talk about how the buyer's going to be paid. What do they charge as a fee? Is it a flat fee? Is it a commission-based fee? Are there any parts of the fee that are due upfront or non-refundable? These are all on the table options in the new buyer agency agreement. So you have to have that conversation with the buyer to understand what it means. Now, none of that is standard. None of it is required by law to be this, that, or the other. It is all an open negotiation between you as the client and your buyer agent as the potential representation you're looking to hire to get you through the buying process. That is part of what the buyer representation agreement looks like. The other thing about the compensation is that it has to be objective. Your agent can't say something like, well, let's worry about that later, or, oh, well, it's this type of payment. Unless this happens, then it becomes this type of payment. Basically, it needs to be a conspicuous disclosure of what the payment looks like. My payment is X%. My payment is this flat fee. Very black and white, very easy for you to understand how they're going to be paid when you find that house. The other part of the contract is that the agent has to define how they're going to get paid, what they're going to get paid, and they can't get paid more than that. A scenario that this protects against is you talk with the agent, they say, my fee is X, and then they find you a house and they find out that you're able to pay X, but the seller is also willing to pay XX. And so they cannot get paid XXX. They can get paid what they came to an agreement with you on when they signed your buyer representation agreement. So open houses are still a very popular way for buyers to get out there and see something, decide if they're ready to make a move or ready to make a purchase. And frankly, open houses are a fun thing to do on a weekend. You don't have to have any kind of buyer representation agreement to go to an open house. It's open to the public, so anybody can kind of come and go. There'll be an agent there. You can have a conversation with that agent. That agent may talk to you about their services. You don't have to sign anything to see the open house. And that agent who's at the open house, they may get your contact info so that they can give feedback to the seller, reach back out to you for any follow-up questions, things like that. And they may talk to you about buyer representation, but you don't have to sign to see a house at an open house. The other thing too is you can be in an exclusive buyer agency representation, and if your agent's not available on the weekend, but you're out looking at open houses, you can do that. Just let the agent who's showing the open house, the host, let them know that you're in a buyer representation agreement. And so then that way they'll be like, great, thanks for checking out the house. Who's your agent? And then maybe they'll follow up with your agent after the open house to see if there's any feedback worth sharing with the seller. Okay, so I saved the best for last. The first part of this, the video, we talked about how there's going to be a change that's going to be kind of weird to get used to. The last part of the video is kind of a neat way to wrap it up, because there's this concern out there that, oh my gosh, I already have to save up for a down payment, closing costs. I've got to think about the cost to make the move. And now I've got to pay a buyer agent as well. That's just an amount of money that I have to save up for that could push buying a house down the road. The good news is that sellers can still agree to pay your buyer agent commission. They can also agree to offer any kind of concessions towards your closing costs that might help make it easier for you to be able to buy a house. So in this scenario, you find a house for $500,000. You need to have roughly 150, let's say, in cash on hand to make the purchase. Maybe you're doing that from the sale of another house, or you've saved up over years, whatever. 150 is what it takes to get in the house. Maybe you only saved up 140 and your gap is about $10,000. When you write your offer with your buyer's agent to the seller, you can ask the seller to cover that $10,000 gap. And the seller can agree to that when they factor in what their net proceeds are on the sale of their house. And it just becomes part of the negotiation. So because buyer's agents are being paid by the buyer now doesn't necessarily mean it has to be out of your pocket if you can negotiate it into the purchase with your seller. That's not really any different than what you were able to do before. Before, you could ask a seller to cover your closing costs. Now you can ask a seller to cover your closing costs and your buyer agency fees. So that is how you can still afford a really good home if you don't have enough for down payment, closing costs, buyer agency fees, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the good news on this. And a really good agent is going to understand how they can still get you into the house that you want without having you need to be more out of pocket with your cash. At Home Oregon Coast, we work with buyers all the time, trying to find houses up and down the coastline here in Oregon. And we'd love to help you the next time you're ready to buy something on the coast. Thank you.